again. This is lesson number 5.
大家好，这是第5课。
And so far we have looked at introduction to the book Genesis.
到目前为止呢，我们已经读过和看过那个创世纪的一个介绍。
And after that we had the creation story and then the fall.
然后呢，我们读那个上帝创造世界的故事，以及人类的堕落。
After that, we already looked a little bit at the restoration of God's rule in Jesus Christ.
后面呢，我们就会读到呢，就是说上帝我们上帝对人的治理的一个重建啊。
It's interesting that the whole Bible actually gives the story of God's creation, and then the fall, and then His rebuilding.
有趣的是，就是说这个圣经故事跟我们讲上帝怎样创造这个世界，然后人类的堕落，以及呢人和上帝的关系的重新的恢复。
So the first few chapters of the Bible are very important because they set the stage. They show us about creation and the fall.
所以圣经的开头的几个章节是非常重要的，它为我们搭建了一个舞台，让我们看到上帝是如何创造这世界和人的，以及人的堕落。
So the rest of the whole Bible is about God's rebuilding of His kingdom.
所以圣经的后面整个部分呢，都是讲了上帝呢如何来重建他的国度。
But as you will realize, it's a long story.
但是我们都意识到这是一个很长的故事。
The creation, the restoration of God's kingdom is a long process. In fact, He is still working on it.
上帝的国度的重建是一个很缓慢的、很长的过程，直到今天还没有完成。
And as I have said, the book of Genesis is a book of new beginnings. It's more than one new beginning.
就正如我们所说的，说创世纪呢，这本书其实是讲了一个新的世界的开始，一个重建的过程。
In this first book of the Bible, it seems that there is a little progress in God's rebuilding.
在这个圣经的第一本书中，我们可以看到，好像呢，就是说这一切呢进展得非常缓慢。
It seems that every time He has to start all over again because humans are messing it up.
似乎呢，就是说，上帝每次想重新开始的时候，人呢总是把这一切又弄得一团糟。
In this lesson today, we will see how after the fall, the creation, the people went from bad to worse.
那么今天我们可以看到呢，就是说，在人类的堕落之后，人类呢是怎样的逐步的人类呢越来越堕落。
That first sin of Adam and Eve started like a chain reaction of more and more evil, death and destruction.
人类始祖亚当夏娃的原罪好像呢引起了一系列的连锁的反应。那么呢，越来越多的那个死亡，更多的罪恶都出现了。
It becomes clear that when the relationship between God and people is broken, that then everything else is starting to fall apart.
似乎呢，当人和神的关系断裂之后，那么一切都变得越来越糟糕了。
Okay, we like you now first to read Genesis 4 through 6 verse 8.
下面呢，让我们来看创世纪第4章，一直到那个第6章的第8节。
If you have not yet read this part from Scripture, chapters 4, 5, and the beginning of chapter 6, it's better if you now stop the DVD player and first read these chapters in the Bible.
如果各位兄弟姊妹还没有读到这个第4章、第5章以及第6章前半部分，我们建议大家呢先暂停这个 DVD， 我们先呢读一读这个经文。
Okay, we hope that you have read the chapters from Genesis.
希望各位呢都已经读过了创世纪的这相关的章节。
So we have 3 stories in this lesson to show that situation went from bad to worse.
那么呢，这一部分呢，我们有3个故事，我们大家可以看到呢，事情呢是越来越糟糕了。
In the beginning of chapter 4, we read the story of 2 brothers.
在第4章开头的时候，我们读到了一个兄弟俩的故事。
Adam and Eve got children.
亚当和夏娃呢，他们生儿育女有了孩子。
Boys and girls.
生了儿子，也生了女儿。
Some of the children are mentioned, especially the first boys, Cain and Abel.
这里特别提到了一些他们的孩子，特别是他们的儿子该隐和亚伯。
As these boys grow up into young men, they start to grow their own food.
当这个孩子慢慢长大的时候呢，他们呢开始独立谋生。
It says that Abel kept animals, perhaps sheep, and that Cain was growing food crops in the soil.
那么呢，亚伯呢，他是牧羊人，那么该隐呢，他是农民。
Both boys knew their God.
2个孩子呢，他们都认识上帝。
They realized that it was God who had provided for them, and that God was helping them to grow the food.
他们心里都认识到呢，是上帝呢恩赐给他们食物，是上帝呢让他们呢，就是说一切有丰衣足食，一切呢能够养活他们自己。
They realized that they should give a portion of their produce back to God to say thank you.
他们也知道，他们应该把他们的产物的粮食的食物的一部分来献给上帝，来感谢上帝的恩赐。
So each of these young men gave part of their produce back to God.
所以呢，2个年轻人都把他们的食物的、他们产物的一部分来给上帝，来奉献，来敬给上帝。
So Abel gave from his flocks, from his animals, and Cain gave from his crops.
那么亚伯呢，就从他牧养的那些羊群那些动物里面呢，来献给上帝祭。那么该隐呢，就从他的农产品中选出一部分来献给上帝。
But there was an important difference.
但是他们献祭给上帝中间却有巨大的区别。
Look in verse 4. It says, Abel brought the fat portions from some of the firstborn of the flock.
我们看到第4节说亚伯将他羊群中头生的羊的脂油献上。
So Abel gives the best of the best in return to God.
亚伯将他的产品中，他的食物中最好的一部分都拿来献给上帝。
Apparently he wanted to show his real appreciation and to say really thank you to the God who had given him so much.
很显然我们可以看到亚伯呢想真心的感谢上帝，想让上帝知道他是多么的感激他，他是多么的爱他。
He realized that God had loved him, and he also wanted to show his love for God.
他从内心里知道上帝是如此爱他，因此他也想告诉上帝他是多么的爱他。
On the other hand, it says that Cain just gave some of his crops to God.
另一方面，该隐呢，只是把他产物的一部分拿来献给上帝。
That suggests that his heart wasn't really in it.
那么从这里可以看出他的内心并不是真的爱上帝。
He gave some to God because he knew he had to do it.
他只是把一部分他的产物献给上帝，因为他知道他必须这样做。
He figured it didn't really make a lot of difference which crops he gave to God.
他只是随意的拿了一些东西拿来给上帝，没有一丁点区别的。
He did not do it from a joyful heart that really loved God.
他做这一切不是出于他的真正的爱上帝的心。
So after a while it became clear that God was blessing Abel for his gifts, but God did not really appreciate the gifts of Cain.
所以很快我们就可以看到上帝呢他非常的喜悦悦纳 亚伯所献的祭不太喜欢该隐所献的祭。
Cain should have realized that his heart was not right with God.
该隐自己应该意识到，他的内心不是真的爱上帝。
But instead he became jealous of his brother and he became angry that his brother was more successful than he was.
他并没有意识到自己的错，相反的，他开始妒忌他的兄弟，他觉得他的兄弟似乎比他更成功。
So he said, why does my brother always have to get the best? How come he's more successful? Why is he better than I am?
他心里就想，为什么我的兄弟总是得到最好的？为什么他好像就比我成功呢？好像什么他都比我做得更好呢？
So over time he got more and more angry about it and he started to hate his brother.
所以一天一天的，他越来越仇恨他的兄弟，他越来越生气。
So God came and spoke to Cain.
所以上帝就来了，他就对该隐讲话。
He says, Cain, you must be very careful.
他说该隐你一定要小心
Because the evil one will try to master you. He will try to control you.
因为罪会控制你的。
And when the evil one tries to control you, you must fight it.
当罪想制服你的时候，你一定要和他争斗
It's like a wild animal that is scratching at the door.
就像有一个野兽它趴在你的门口。
So, Cain, what will you do?
那么该隐你应该怎么做呀？
Will you chase it back?
你会把它赶回去吗？
Or will you open the door and let it in?
你还是打开门，让它走进你的房子呢？
Cain did not listen to God's warning.
该隐并没有听从上帝的警告。
He opened his heart to the evil one.
他把自己的内心敞开了，让恶魔走进了他的内心。
So one day he said to his brother, come, let's go into the field.
所以有一天，他对自己的兄弟亚伯说：“兄弟，让我们到外面的旷野去吧。”
And then he killed his brother.
在那儿，他杀死了他的兄弟亚伯。
So God came to Cain a second time.
那么，上帝再一次的来到了该隐的面前。
Remember earlier, God had come to his parents when they had sinned.
对我们应该想到当年当该隐的父母犯罪的时候，上帝也来到他们的身边。
And God had said, where are you?
上帝说：“你们在哪里？”
And they admitted that they were hiding because they were afraid of God.
当时亚当夏娃他们说他们自己藏起来了，因为他们很害怕面对上帝。
So now God is saying, Cain, where is your brother?
那么上帝又来了，他对该隐说：“该隐你的兄弟在哪里？”
And Cain says, well, who cares? I don't know. Am I my brother's babysitter?
他说：“该隐说，哎呀，谁知道谁管呢？我又不是照看我兄弟的。”
Of course, it was foolish for Cain to think that God would not know, that God had not seen everything.
该隐真的是很愚蠢他以为上帝对这一切都不知道
Unfortunately, even today, we often make that mistake.
很不幸的是，直到今天，我们还有很多人经常犯着同样的错误。
When we do something bad, we sometimes pretend that God does not know or that God has not seen it.
我们有时候做了错事，我们犯了罪我们都想也许上帝不知道呢。
So God punishes Cain with an extra curse.
所以呢，上帝呢就惩罚该隐用他的咒诅来惩罚该隐。
The earth will not cooperate with Cain, and he will not find rest.
他说了，你种地地不再给你效力。
The word rest is an important word in the Bible.
那么休息这个词在圣经中是非常重要的一个词。
It always refers to the blessings that God gives, that God promises.
这个词呢，让我们经常想起上帝对我们的一个祝福。
So that Cain will be a restless wanderer means that also that he will not experience the blessing of God.
那么说，上帝咒诅他说他再也得不到休息，得不到安宁。那么呢，是上帝呢对他的一个惩罚。
So Cain complains to God that will be too hard for him.
于是该隐呢就和上帝呢抱怨说这个惩罚呢太重了。
Because he realizes that nobody can live without God.
因为他这个时候他才意识到了，如果没有上帝的保护，任何人也无法生存下去。
But God makes it clear that Cain is still made in God's image and that God still will protect Cain's life.
但是上帝呢也很明确的说呀，该隐身上还有上帝的影子，上帝的形象，上帝一定还会继续保护他。
So even the worst people, like criminals or killers, for instance, they are still made in God's image.
所以一些坏人啊，一些罪犯啊，一些杀手、凶手啊，他们身上也有上帝的影子。
And even for such people, God still gives blessings.
就算是这样的人，上帝依然呢爱他们，给他们祝福。
Everybody receives blessings from God, and everybody has to say thank you to God.
我们每个人都得到了上帝的祝福，所以我们每个人都应该感谢我们的上帝。
And the life of every human being is precious for God.
生命，我们每个人的生命，上帝呢都非常的珍爱。
And we are also, of course, warned that we must fight against sin.
那么我们也得到警告，我们一定要和罪恶做斗争。
But nobody can do that.
但是我们都没办法做到。
The only way we can begin to fight against sin and evil is when we have the Spirit of Jesus in us.
那么呢，我们唯一的方法能和罪恶、能和邪恶做斗争，就是我们开始呢，就说有上帝、有耶稣的经历和我们同在。
Okay, let's go to the second story.
让我们呢来看呢第二个故事。
It's in the second part of chapter 4, beginning in verse 19.
那是第4章第19节开始。
By now we are 4 generations further into history.
那么呢，我们现在呢，可以更多的看看历史上发生的一些事情。
And we read about a man called Lamech.
我们呢读到了一个叫做拉麦的这个人的故事。
Adam is still alive, and so all the people know about God.
那么那个时候亚当呢还活在世上，所有的人呢都认识上帝，都知道上帝。
Also, Lamech must have heard about God's goodness and about the fall into sin.
拉麦一定听说过上帝为人类所做的一切美好的事情，以及人的堕落和犯罪。
He must have heard about God's warnings, but also about God's promises.
他也一定听到过上帝呢给人的警告，也当然也有上帝的给人的祝福。
But evil has continued to do its destructive work.
但是呢，这些罪恶呢仍然在做那些破坏性的工作。
Lamech is not satisfied with one wife.
拉麦呢不满足于只娶一个妻子。
He takes 2 women.
他娶了2位妻子。
Now these women must somehow have been relatives of him, but the Bible does not talk about that.
也许呢这2个妻子呢都是他的亲戚，但是圣经上呢并没有具体的谈到这个问题。
Now, apparently there were no genetic problems of close family marrying together.
很显然，在人类早期的时候呢，并没有呢近亲结婚所带来的一些问题和后果。
If God created everything at the beginning, He should have had no problem in also providing for this.
那么上帝呢，创造了人类，最开始这一切的时候，那么呢，这样的问题其实并不存在。
Sometimes people who reject the Bible make a big problem about that.
那么有些人呢，他们是反对圣经的，然后认为呢，这是一个很大的问题。
So look at this Bible. All these relatives, like even brothers and sisters, they must have married each other and have children together. That is bad.
他说：“你看圣经这前面这些人呢都是近亲结婚他们甚至生儿育女真是太糟糕了。”
But they themselves ignore the problem and do not have a solution themselves.
但是他们呢，并不知道这样的问题怎么解决。
How do they resolve the problem? How the first humans could reproduce and have offspring?
那么，人类早期的人类呢，他们是怎样解决这些问题的呢？他们是怎样的繁衍、生儿育女，有这么多的后代的呢？
When we have come to know God, we don't make problems about these things anymore. We know that God is powerful and that God can provide.
但是我们一旦认识上帝以后，这些都不是什么问题啊！上帝是如此的伟大，上帝的大能，他解决一切的问题。
So we read how Lamech is bragging to his 2 wives.
那我们这里可以看到啊，拉麦呢，他娶了2位妻子。
He says, "Oh, do you see this wound that I have here? You see this scar?"
他说，他对他的2个妻子说：“他说你看我身上这些伤，看见没有？”
Some kid did that to me, so I killed him right away on the spot.
他说有的人呢，他伤了我，所以我呢就把他们杀了。
And says that God will protect Cain. Well, I can look after myself.
他说上帝呢会保护该隐，那我自己我要保护我自己。
Anybody who touches me, I will just kill him.
任何敢碰我的人，我要把他们杀掉。
So the Bible shows us that 4 generations after Cain, the things have gotten quite bad.
所以呢，这圣经书上就告诉我们在该隐之后啊，4代之后啊，这事情，这一切变得越来越糟糕。
Throughout history, proud and violent men have often called themselves lords of the earth or sons of God.
纵观人类历史，有很多一些很骄傲的内心充满了暴力的人他们说自己呢是君王是君主。
Powerful rulers such as emperors often call themselves God.
一些具有高位的一些统治者，经常自称君王。
They wanted people to worship them as God.
他们想让人们敬拜他们，把他们当上帝一样来敬拜。
So I think that the sons of God here refers to maybe a gang of such violent, proud men.
所以呢，我认为在这里，神的儿子们应该是指这样的一群人他们呢内心充满了邪恶，但是他们呢又位居高位。
They call themselves sons of God, and they used force and violence for other people.
他们自称神的儿子们，那么呢，他们用自己的权势来压迫人们。
So by force, they would take any girl or woman that they wanted for themselves for their pleasure.
那么呢，他们用暴力来强求他们看中的任何女子和他们在一起。
Yet the people should have known that God did not want them to live with such abuse or such violence.
人们应该知道，上帝呢并不喜悦他们呢就说对人呢对其他的人采用的这种暴力。
So when this kind of violence and evil became spread over the whole earth, God said, "Enough is enough."
所以，当这样的一些暴力，当这样的罪恶充满这地的时候，上帝说：“够了，够了，我再也无法忍受了。”
God said, "I will make a new start. I will make a new beginning."
所以，上帝说：“我要重新开始，我要重建新的秩序。”
But God does not destroy everything.
但是，上帝并没有把一切都毁灭。
He preserves a small part of His first creation.
他保留了他创造的那一部分，一小部分。
This is a common theme also later in the Bible.
这个事情在圣经后面也是很常见的。
Because as we have said, the story of the restoration is going with ups and downs.
因为我们从后面都可以看到重建上帝的秩序的这样的一个故事总是起起伏伏的。
So when God has started to rebuild His kingdom and the people of Israel, they also become from bad to go to worse.
他后面当上帝想重建他的国那么以色列人他们呢也反反复复的。
So at the end, God sends them out. He sends them into exile and scatters them over other countries.
最后呢，上帝呢让他们分散到世界各地去，让他们流放，让他们流浪到各地。
Yet the people should have known that God hates this kind of sexual abuse and violence.
那么我们应该知道，上帝呢，是很不喜悦像这样的性暴力这样的一些不好的事情。
So when this kind of evil became rampant, spread through all the human population, God said, "Enough is enough."
当这样的罪恶充满了这地的时候，上帝说：“够了，够了，足够了。”
I will make a new beginning.
我要重新开始。
But God does not destroy everything.
但是上帝呢，并没有把这一切全部毁灭。
God maintains, God preserves a small remnant.
那么上帝呢，保留了一小部分。
But this is a common theme in the Bible.
这个在圣经里面呢，到处可见这样的例子。
Also, in later times, God sometimes wants to make a new beginning, for instance, with His people Israel.
那么从后面我们可以看到，那么上帝呢想保留重建他的国，保留一小部分，他想让以色列人来重建他的国。
But He always takes a small part of His people and makes a new beginning with them.
他总是会保留一小部分人来重建他的国。
So God will make a way when it seems that there is no way left to preserve His creation, His kingdom.
在好像我们已经无路可走，已经没有办法来保留他的创造的这个世界的时候，上帝呢总会开出另外一条路来。
When everything looks very dark and gloomy, God Himself provides some glimmer of hope. He brings some light in the darkness.
当看起来一切都是一片黑暗，好像没有任何希望的时候，上帝呢会给我们希望，他给我们带来光明，让我们看到前途。
God always gives a new hope because God has given a wonderful promise.
上帝呢总会带给我们希望的光芒，因为上帝呢，他曾经给我们许诺。
God Himself will make all things new.
上帝他自己会重建一个新的国度。
And we know that He has made real progress when He sent Jesus Christ to the earth.
我们都知道，当他把耶稣基督派到这世上来的时候，他是真正的让一切再进一步往前走。
And when Jesus returns, then He will make it all perfect again.
当耶稣再次降临的时候，他会让这个一切。